we were expecting. So I would say whenever you're ready.
We're ready. Well, first of all, welcome to everyone. Hope you're having a good holiday season. I noticed the city manager's very festive behind his back. So congratulations, you get the award today. It looks like Stephanie Hutchinson gets second with a plant behind her. So with that, I'm Guy Cosentino. I've been asked to help moderate these sessions, these public sessions for law enforcement and public safety reform. This is, as many of you know, several subgroups have been meeting based on the directives of the governor with some executive orders. And I think the vast majority of you who are on the screen that I can see, and I know there's some that are not on the screen right now, have been participating in the process. And so what we're going to do is, I think there's an agenda that might pop up at some point, but it's a simple agenda. So let me just go through it quickly. I'll have some general comments about process. What we're doing, we're going to have presentations from the three subgroups about that. And then we're going to let the subgroups make their presentations and then go Q&A after that. And then we'll wrap up with some further items that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So first and foremost, we want to thank everybody for participating in those subgroups. I've listened to some of the videos. If you are part of this process, but have not been able to listen to the other subgroups, I do encourage you to listen to those. I know and I'm not pointing out the third subgroup, there's a very interesting discussion the other day, especially with some local items that had come up. So we encourage you to go and listen to those as well. This is the first of several public hearings. I think we're going to have at least one more before we move forward, and there will be some legislative recommendations to the county legislature and the city council, and some of these will be done in advance because they're being done internally to both the Cayuga County Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Shank and also Chief Butler, who I know is somewhere on the screen somewhere, and I just can't see him of the multiple faces up there. So those are being done by APD. So we want to thank both departments for coming forward. We should say this for the record, and I know this is all being recorded by the city clerk, Mr. Mason. The city and the county were way ahead of this, way ahead of the governor and his mandates and executive orders during the summer. And we appreciate the leadership of both departments as they move forward. So that needs to be taken in that context. And I know that a lot of private groups have been having conversations before all of this with the sheriff and the police department. We encourage that and encourage that to continue. So with that being said, we're going to try to keep this meeting to an hour. It may go over, but we're going to do our best to keep it to an hour. We're going to have 3 presentations, and then we'll open up for Q&A. The first presentation, I think Legislator Daly is here on my screen somewhere. I thought I saw her.
I am.
Oh, there you are. Legislator Daly is the co-chair of subgroup 1. That is law enforcement and community engagement. And she's going to talk 3 to 5 minutes about what that group has been doing. Legislator, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, the report out for our group 1, the group was facilitated by myself and Deb. And we were one of 3 groups that had met twice before this meeting today. Each of the 3 groups was intended to be part of that comprehensive review of the policies and practices of our law enforcement agencies. Our group was to focus on police structure and training. Prior to the group meeting, we received a significant amount of information from both law enforcement agencies. We received policies on bias-based policing, restraints, training, use of force, search warrants, crisis intervention, incidents, and those were just a few of them. All the policies that had been developed or are in the process of developing are using the Lexapol platform. And this is a software platform that makes sure police policies are in compliance with laws and standards. And both APD and Cayuga County Sheriff's Department are using Lexapol and are both in the process of accreditation, which I believe is a credit to both organizations. At our first meeting, November 24th, we talked about use of force and the responsibility to intervene and report. We went through the issues around no-knock warrants, discussed in detail some of the criteria for use of that warrant. Chokeholds we discussed, which are both banned by both agencies. We talked about racial bias, implicit bias training, and the need for ongoing training and de-escalation training techniques. We covered mental health interventions and the existence of specialized officer training, a crisis intervention team with mobile crisis from Liberty Resources, as well as local providers assisting when individuals are in some type of emotional crisis. Our second meeting, December 8th, we covered some repeat topics, again, more in detail around no-knock warrants. There was also a focus on juvenile arrests and how they are handled. There was a discussion on how officer evaluation information is used to determine ongoing training needs. And then we had a discussion on qualified immunity. At the meeting, the idea was brought forward of developing a rapid response initiative, which would be a standing committee of law enforcement and community members convened after an incident to assist with de-escalation and help ensure accurate information gets out. Basically, this second meeting set the stage for the larger issue, one to be referred to this group, asking the very pertinent question: how can the community be more engaged in law enforcement process, policies, and protocols? And how can this engagement be sustained? I think there was general agreement from this group that the work around that has already started.
Thank you, Legislator. Counselor, do you have anything you want to add as the co-chair of that committee?
No, Elaine covered it all. It's great. She put it succinctly, I think.
Thank you. We'll now hear from subgroup 2, which is crime prevention. And I think the Assistant Corporation Counsel, Nate Garland, is presenting on that. Are you there, Mr. Garland? Let's see him on my screen. Maybe I can suggest we'll jump to, is the co-chair of that committee on?
That's me, Guy.
Oh, Chairwoman, how are you?
I'm
I
doing
thought it
well.
was, but I wasn't sure. You were on my original list. So do you want us to come back and wait for Mr. Garland? We can jump to group 3 first and see if he comes back on.
That would be fine.
All right. I guess we'll turn to subgroup 3, which is alternatives to police response and procedural justice. I know this is Mr. Diger, the city manager, and they had a really great discussion last week. So, Mr. Diger, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Steve Lynch, the Director of Planning and Economic Development from the county, co-chaired this group with me. We had a pretty good sized group of individuals from diverse backgrounds within this group. Chief Butler visited with us for a little bit, and Sheriff Skank. We also had the involvement of some of the local village police departments as well. So I'm not sure that all of the folks that might be calling in or taking part in this may not be just from the city. We've tried to include everybody in this overall effort. Along the way, prior to these meetings, I know that the police chief and the sheriff had engaged some of our other local agencies, those being NAACP, the Harriet Tubman Center for Justice and Peace, and the Auburn Human Rights Commission, in some discussions prior to some of this more formalized stuff that happened as part of New York State Executive Order 203. I do want to mention also, just so we don't forget about it, that both the Auburn Police Department and the Cayuga County Sheriff's Department are maintaining online community surveys where people can have input there. And those links can be found through the police department or the sheriff's department social media pages, as well as the city and county web pages. All of these meetings of these subgroups, there are notes that are available again on the city's webpage for those interested in catching up if they haven't done so. And the meetings were recorded, so you can actually watch those Zoom meetings similar to this. Subgroup 3, the focus was the proper response to criminal calls. So discussing what it is that happens and why do the police get sent to a variety of different calls. So we engaged the director of the 911 center, Denise Spingler, to address some of those issues along with our law enforcement partners. And one of our panelists was Heather Petrus from Cayuga Counseling Services. That is part of a mobile crisis intervention unit that responds within the city, and they're looking to expand their ability to provide services in a broader area. But there was definitely a lot of discussion about how a 911 dispatcher receives a call, what information they're looking for, who they dispatch to those calls, and why. We moved from that on to diversionary programs, which are programs typically designed to take low-level offenders, if you will, or first-time offenders, and put them into programs to help provide them counseling and guidance to avoid incarceration and things of that nature, and rather than be punitive, be an educational process. So we had a lot of discussion about those. We discussed what other community partners may exist out there that we haven't already engaged with and who we need to engage with in the future. We talked about community expectations and how we can continue this dialogue into the future so that as times change and community expectations change, that our local law enforcement leaders can stay up on that and be as progressive as possible. We too had a discussion about implicit bias and what training takes place there and what continued education takes place within our law enforcement agencies, and had a discussion about procedural justice and some of the different programs that are out there within the court system. And then we wrapped up our discussion with transparency and transparency within these police agencies, these law enforcement agencies, about policies, procedures, what happens if someone in the community has a complaint and how that complaint is followed up on, and how accessible that process is to the general public. And we had two good meetings about that. There are some topics that we realize we won't be able to necessarily fully close out. That will be continued discussions, potentially for many more months, or potentially a continued dialogue that happens for many years into the future in order to keep everybody on top of the situation. That was group 3.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lynch, anything to add as co-chair?
Good afternoon. The only thing I would expand on Jeff's explanation of what we talked about was the clarifications that the 911 process brought to the group, and that would be important for our community to understand a little bit more about the process, and also the pretrial diversion and the alternatives to incarceration. That process is not understood well by various agencies and individuals in the community. So any ability to communicate that out a little more clearly would probably help understanding across the board. And Jeff did a great job summing everything else up.
All right, thank you, group 3. I don't know, I'll look. I don't think Mr. Garland is still on yet. So not that this falls to the chairwoman of the legislature, but Chair, if you don't mind talking about group 2, you had a very extensive agenda and covered a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Aileen McNabb-Coleman, Chair of the Ledge, and Nate Garland, Assistant Corporation Counsel for the city, co-chaired this committee with me. We involved 3 mayors of local villages, Mayor Bud Shattuck, Mayor Jim Basile, Mayor Bill Sherman. Chief Butler joined us, Lieutenant Slayton, Lieutenant Wellauer, Lori Piccolo from CAP, and Reverend Josh Chiz joined us as well. So in our areas of discussion, we covered police community relations. We talked specifically about policies and strategies around community engagement and partnerships specifically with community organizations and faith communities. We talked a lot about school safety and security and the partnership with our schools in our county. We talked about, should law enforcement have a presence in schools, and what is that presence like? And then how is that translating to the greater community? We talked about attention to marginalized communities with our outreach programs, and what are the outreach plans? Are there citizen advisory boards and committees? So we covered that area. We also covered right to know law. We talked about officer IDs and informing suspects of the basis of search. We talked about the hiring process. What are our current staffing needs? How do we assess leadership? What is the leadership selection process? How do we recruit diverse candidates to better represent the demographics? Incidentally, I saw Lieutenant Slayton on the news last night talking just about that very subject, about recruitment, which he did a fantastic job. And that was one of the areas, is how can we encourage folks in our community to pursue careers in law enforcement? And overall, we talked about collaboration with the community. In times we should maybe, how could we deploy social service personnel instead of officers to specific situations in the community? So that covered our police community relations areas. The second area we talked about when we met on our second meeting on December 8th, we talked about crime prevention, specifically strategies and policies around the broken windows policy. We had some discussion about stop and frisk, some use of force, some textual stops, excuse me. We talked about quotas. We talked about brandishing weapons and what are the policies around that. Other areas we discussed were problem-oriented policing, talking about repeating incidents. Let's see. And then other areas, hotspots in the city. Specifically, we talked about that. We talked about some focused deterrence. What are some strategies that the city police and the county police, the county sheriff's office use for deterrence? We just touched briefly on environmental design. We talked about community policing initiatives, different diversion programs, restorative justice programs, community-based outreach and violence programs. And we did some discussion about de-escalation strategies. So overall, that pretty much covers what we talked about. Overall, I think what was a defining characteristic of this group and some of our discussion was, some of us didn't know even what is available within our sheriff's department and our police department here locally. We talked about, although we were having an engagement in our conversation, how can we broaden that to a more diverse audience? So we're happy to, I'm happy to see how the next phase of this executive order plays out so we can have more community involvement. And that pretty much sums it up.
Thank you. Thank you for pitch hitting on that one.
Sure.
So before going into Q&A, two housekeeping issues. One will be, I want to ask about process and we're going, but we do have a couple of elected officials who are on the screen that I see, and I do want to make sure we make note of them. We have Assemblyman Mactolo, who I think I'm spending every other day with, I think this week. So welcome, Assemblyman. He represents the northern part of Cayuga County over to Wayne County. And he's joining us. And I know besides Debbie McCormick, member of council, I see Terry Cuddy and Jimmy Gentino from the city. who are participating in both the chair, Ms. Coleman, and Ms. Daly of the legislature. And I think I have all of the legislative and city council representatives. So before going to the Q&A, and how we'll do this is we can either do a free form that you all just speak up and drive me crazy, or you can go to the chat and just say, please call on me if you want to type that in. But before that, I think it would be helpful for everyone who may not have been in the process, what the process will be from here on out in relation to the governor's directives. But more importantly, I believe the city, and I'll start with them, with Chief Butler, the city has done the accreditation process. Could you just give a quick overview? I know the sheriff has talked about where he is in that process and moving his department forward. And then I'll talk to then we'll ask the process question. But for both of you, where do you see this going, where you are, and what you still need to implement post all these meetings? Chief?
Thanks, Guy. I appreciate it. So we're not completed yet with the accreditation process. So the first part of that, in what was touched on by Elaine Daly, was Lexipol. That is a contract that we signed to help us work through recreating and making sure that our policies and procedures are all up to snuff according to state standards or exceeding state standards. So we are about 99% through that process of rewriting, reissuing to our people. And what the next step will be for us is to start documenting within our calls for service how we are abiding by the accreditation standards. And that's going to take some time into the future. And when we feel we're ready, and hopefully my goal was to have our first accreditation review by the state done before I leave. But we're going on, I believe, Deputy Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we're into about almost 3 years.
Yeah, about 3.
So this is a long process. So once we get to that point where we're confident of the implementation stage of all these policies and procedures, we're going to call upon the state and they'll send out accreditation, basically reviewers. And I think the sheriff, since they were accredited in the past, but are not currently, they can maybe speak to that process a little more in depth, because it's going to be a first time for us ever being accredited. But the foundation is there. Like I said, we're 99% completed with all the policies. They are issued to our staff. It's just doing the legwork now of documenting procedures in action through calls for service and how we interact in the community. I think the second part of your question was, how do we see this going forward? I'm very proud, and I know a lot of police agencies across the state see this as a burdensome endeavor that the governor has placed upon us. But like was mentioned in the beginning, opening statement, I feel that the work the sheriff's department and the police department have done over the last several years has really gotten us way beyond the anxiety of this executive order. The accreditation is only a natural progression for this. So I see us as this is just a natural, like I said, a natural progression forward. Our interaction and involvement with the community is only going to get stronger. And I think it's going to be fruitful for us in going into the future to have that strong bond with police community relations. Thank you.
Chief, just before you sign off on this particular piece, as things come up during these 3 subgroups, are those things that you see besides policy items that the city council and the county legislature have to implement or may want to implement? Are there things that you will get from these public meetings that will be implemented regardless of accreditation, that you'll just go through process?
Well, one thing that I brought up internally, and we have talked about it here, is right to know and what that looks like in Auburn, New York. Like I've stated in some of the subgroups, does it have to be as in depth and trying to think of the right word, as in depth as say NYPD? I don't think so. That need is not here locally in Auburn, New York. We don't have some of the police community relation issues that you might see in large metropolitan areas. But I think as a customer service, and that term has come up quite a few times about our interaction and how we interact with the public we serve. Could we do a better job of explaining our purpose? Absolutely. And I think that right to know how we formulate that here locally, I think that's definitely something we can do better in Auburn, New York. So that's one of the things that came up, and I see that moving forward in some type of policy development.
So thank you, Chief. Sheriff Shank, I guess that's a three-part question now. Where you are, process moving forward.
Good afternoon, Guy, and good afternoon to everybody that's on. I appreciate everybody taking the time out to help us with this initiative and having enough interest to help us do the work to make this work. So I appreciate it. But just like the Auburn Police Department, we are currently redoing our policy. We're quite a ways behind to where they are. We're working with Lexipol to totally redesign our policy. I'm hoping that sometime late summer, early fall next year, we'll have our policy redone. And then just like the Auburn Police Department, we'll move towards accreditation. We were accredited a number of years ago. Unfortunately, we let that go and did not maintain it, but it's been my goal to accredit our road patrol division and then hopefully move on to do that with some of our other divisions here. So we are in that process. Just as the chief said, I'm glad, very proud of our partnership. We've had a great partnership. Our agencies working together for a number of years. And, you know, I feel like some of the success we have at the sheriff's office is due in great part due to that partnership we've had with the Auburn City Police Department. So I was glad that the city was willing to work with us and partner with us on this initiative. I think it certainly benefits both agencies, and it's been great for us to do that. Moving forward, through this process, I've started to really identify some areas that I see are going to need a lot of further discussion. And I think that's great. There's been different concerns that have been brought forth through the different subgroups that have become clear to me that we're not going to finalize those discussions before this project is due in April. We're going to have to continue speaking about some of the things that we're going to work on moving forward. And I think through this process, we're building some great partnerships and relationships with stakeholders in the community. And I hope additional people that may be attending this meeting or others in the future from the public that are willing to help us move forward and provide information to us as far as what do they want to see in our law enforcement agencies. So I think building these relationships moving forward are going to be key to our success. But again, I appreciate everybody helping with this project. I was a little concerned when this mandate first came out because I felt like we certainly have been doing some of this work. Why are we being mandated to do what we're already doing? But as the project's moving forward, I can see that this is going to be a great exercise for our community, not only in the city of Auburn, but outside throughout the whole county. So I'm excited to continue this work and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'd like to turn to both the chair and the manager from your perspectives with this executive order from the governor. There's a timeline process that you're both aware of. Could you explain to the public what you see presented to both the legislature and then the city council respectively on any votes or changes thereof? Chair, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I actually don't have the timeline in front of me right now. But yeah, we will present something to the ledge. Every local municipality can vote on this, this plan. And, I believe we're going to envelop the villages and towns into the county vote, and then the city is going to do their own vote. But Jeff, you may have the timeline in front of you.
I'm looking up the actual timeline right now, but essentially, here we go. What we're looking at, and this is a statewide initiative, and we're looking at a deadline of around February 1st to present to whichever legislative body, whether that be the county ledge or the city council, for adoption, right? So there will be a process that takes place whether things are adopted as a local law or a council resolution or legislative resolution. We have some options on how we do this. But essentially what we're looking to do is we'll have continued public discussion and input. And we will end up with a final draft document that essentially is memorializes the work that's been put into the plan to this point in time, or up until February 1st, as it would be. And also memorializes a commitment on the part of each municipality to continue the dialogue and the transparency in their respective law enforcement agencies.
And do you see, both of you see this being done separately by each of your respective boards? Or are you not there yet?
Yeah, we've had some discussion about that, and early on, as much as the Auburn Police Department and the County Sheriff's Department and all the village police departments work together, they have, in some cases, there's certainly similarities, but there are also procedural and operational differences between the agencies. So their final documents will look different and be unique to each agency because of the services they provide. And therefore, if you look at the executive order, it actually requires the municipality to adopt something. So the city will do it separately from the county.
Okay. So I'd like to open up discussion and start. And so a couple of just introductory thoughts on this process. One, we'd like to play it like Jeopardy if you have a question. So we'd like you to end with a question mark at the end. If you're making a statement, please say that it is a statement. We're taking these down so that we know where people are coming from. You can either raise your hand or just hit on the chat box that you'd like to be recognized. But if, because I don't see anybody right now yet, I'd like to start with the question that Elaine Daly posed at the end of her presentation, and that was, how can the larger community participate in this process? Anybody have anything they want to?
Al, I can answer that, Guy. I think one of the best ways to do that, if the community hasn't done that yet, is to fill out our surveys. Certainly, we have our surveys available on our social media sites or on our websites. But if you haven't completed that survey, please do that. I know we've received a number of responses and replies, but there's obviously a lot of people in our community that haven't had the opportunity to do that. And I'd also like to point out that there are two separate and different surveys. So we would like anyone that's willing to do that to please fill out both of those to get us that information.
Do you have a number from either the city and the county of how many people have filled out the surveys roughly?
I can tell you for the sheriff's office, we have over 500 so far, but I can't answer for the city.
The city is about 320.
Okay. Is that what you both thought would be about the number at this stage, or no? Or did you think you'd get a lot more?
I was hoping for a lot more. The last survey we did in 2019, we had upwards of 800. Okay. But we're going to keep it live. But one thing we're doing differently, and that's, you know, in full fairness of transparency, the responses every week, we're posting the responses on our website. So, you know, good, bad, indifferent, everybody gets to see exactly how people are answering, and that's going to be part of this process going forward as we create this plan. You know, people that cannot voice their opinions in a forum like this, their opinions and their suggestions are being heard through that survey, and that needs to be incorporated in some form or fashion into the plan moving forward.
So on that particular note, there was a question that came up during one of the presentations, one of the subgroups, about people who don't want to identify themselves when they're making critiques. How do you handle that process? What is the process for that?
Well, I think the survey is a perfect example of that, because they don't have to self-identify. They don't even have to give us their race, their age. There's a not applicable if they want to, and if they want to be as harsh as they want in the comment section, you know, we invite it. That's the only way we're going to learn and we're going to know is we got to hear it. So that's the involvement part. We need to hear that.
Back to Elaine Daly's question. Any thoughts? Anyone want to chime in on this? How do we get the larger community to participate in this process? I'll open it up to other questions or other thoughts or people want to make, having either watched the videos, heard this discussion, to help the process along.
Hi, this is Elaine. As we talked about this in our group, I mean, we went from one place to the other. Is there a room for community involvement in policy development? And then we got into the Lexipol, platform and how the policies are being developed. Is there a way that the community can be involved in certain review boards? Then we talked about the pros and cons of that. And then there was discussion about what I thought the sheriff had brought forward is there's already outreach to certain community members around what kind of training would be the most appropriate. And I think the sheriff, you spoke to that at one of our, in one of the meetings that we had. And then there was a group of people who met following an incident that is sort of this ability to bring people together after an incident. And I think those are a couple of things that had already started. Is that not correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a perfect example of the, I believe it was your group, Elaine, the Rapid Response Initiative. And do we have some formalization? No, but we have a group of individuals in the social justice realm that we have grown confident in talking honestly with each other. And when there was an incident, I reached out to this group and we all met through a Zoom meeting and had a very fruitful discussion. And that's how we're going to progress forward. I think that's a great example of the work that we have done and are doing. It's all about that trust, that transparency, and forming those relationships. And that's, I think, a perfect example.
And our partnerships have grown beyond our law enforcement agencies to other groups within the community, and that outreach continues to build, and we want to continue to build up on that, make our circles larger. And I think that's the key to accomplishing what we all want to accomplish with this program and moving forward.
Thank you. Mr. Berry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to follow up what was just said, I think it's important that while we are building relationships, while we are able to have difficult conversations, I think a number of these issues need to be institutionalized by the fact that we're dealing with a history of systemic and institutionalized situations that I do not want to depend on the goodwill of a number of people at a certain point in time to move things forward. However we can institutionalize it, make it operational, make it part of the community's culture, part of the law enforcement culture, I think that will go a long way. I've always maintained that the best way to safeguard law enforcement officers is for the community to know who they are as people, to have the opportunity to work with them, to collaborate with them. And I don't want to be dependent on, again, the goodwill versus knowing that we've built into kind of the structure and organizational thinking of the larger community that this is what we do and this is how we do it.
Okay. Any comments on that particular? I think what Mr. Berry is bringing up right now is, we have two individuals in law enforcement as the heads of those organizations that a lot of people have faith in, but they're not going to be there forever. And so what do you look at legacy and policy that way?
And I think the accreditation process is a start to that. On this call is our former police chief, Gary Janata, somebody that taught me and was somebody that I looked up throughout my career up to. But it's something that, he thought about back in his day. It's a very laborious, cumbersome procedure to undertake. But as Bill says, legacy, I think that if we can accomplish that, I'm hoping that will be my legacy, is being an accredited agency, because that's going to lay the groundwork for a stable foundation of not only state best practices, but we work above and beyond those best practices. We're not just satisfied with the accreditation itself. If we can make that policy better as a best practice, we're definitely looking to do that. And I think working through those policies, having that newly formed culture shift that we've experienced in our department has been intertwined within those policies that we've created and implemented. So I hear you loud and clear, Bill. I think we are on that path, if not, at the apex of that hill. And I really hope that, like you said, that when I'm gone, those policies will live on, and they'll be strong, and they'll be not only best practices, but state accredited.
Mr. Lynch, I'll come back to you in just a second, Mr. Berry. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Guy. In a lot of the work that we do with community planning, whether it's comprehensive plans or something as in the city of Auburn with their community development block grants, what we build in to institutionalize that community conversation is to build in review periods, which the accreditation does do and has triggered this process. But that is something that might be considered as something that can be institutionalized, if you want to put it that way.
Thank you. Mr. Berry, didn't mean to cut you off, but I saw Mr. Lynch there. So.
No, I just wanted to press on the point that's been mentioned before. When I read through the governor's executive order, I think this community, law enforcement, elected officials, the general population needs to be proud of the fact that, as it's been mentioned earlier, that we have been moving on a number of these principles. We are having the discussions. We are developing relationships. We are developing plans. So I think our transition to meeting the dictates of what the governor of the state is looking for positions this community well. I just, on a personal level, concern is how do we get all of this information out to the larger community in a better way than what we've been able to do, so that we've worked with the sheriff and the police department to be transparent. There's a lot of information that's available to the public. I'm at a loss now as to how do we get the public to respond to that? Do we need to have a better relationship with faith-based ministers so that they can use their pulpits on a Sunday to get this information out? I'm not sure how we do that, because I think that the community needs to understand where we are and where we're going. And more importantly, that everybody is interested in hearing their voices and will welcome those types of comments, whether they're critical or whether they're praiseworthy. So however we can, enhance greater community, involvement, I think that would be great.
So to kind of put them, Mr. Cornelius, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think that there's at least two parts to this thing. Policy is one of them, and I think that having the appropriate policy is obviously very important. But policy is only as good as the people who are enforcing it, and so continuing along the lines of having the appropriate leadership in the different agencies. And we have both the Auburn Police Department and the Sheriff's Office are very young departments right now, and people will follow their leaders. And if we continue to kind of cultivate the supervision and have the buy-in internally, which I think that both agencies have, then those guys on the street, to Mr. Berry's point, are going to be out there engaging with the community and working on pushing this information out about this is what we're about and this is how you get this information and this is how we do that. I think the fact that we're both really young agencies, you know, has its drawbacks, but it has its positives too, and we get to create this next generation of police officers in the form that we'd like to see them, and then that ensures that the policies kind of move forward beyond the current leadership.
So there's been a very diverse group that have been involved. I know you've had a number of elected officials, mayors and whatnot involved here, but I want to follow up on Mr. Berry's question. I don't mean to put both Stephanie Hutchinson, Heather Petras, and Robert Chiz on the spot, but I know in the case of Stephanie Hutchinson, we worked a lot trying to work on the issue of the census and getting that information out, and there were natural barriers out there for that. We run into, you both work with human service organizations and that network. How do we get this message out to them? If you don't mind answering that. And Pastor, I would also ask the question that while 20 years ago, some of us may remember, or 30 years ago, there was a very active interfaith groups out there. I'm not sure that it is as active today as we may have envisioned 20 years ago. So to the three of you, would you mind chiming in on how we get this message out? Anyone can take their speaker off if they wish to speak. If they don't, I will.
I was deferring to them because you addressed them first, but I can't see them, so I don't know if they're.
Okay, so we'll hear from Heather Petras from Cayuga Council first.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So how do we get that message out? So we utilize a lot of social media to be able to get our message out, and also old-fashioned mail and engaging the clients when they come in. So we're, seeing thousands and thousands of people through our various programming. And so I think that we have been, I can just speak for our population, really trying to meet them where they are at as far as being able to communicate with them. So, we have these conversations with them. We really keep them engaged. How is it best to reach you or best to get you engaged in what is going on in the community and being able to get information to you?
Stephanie Hutchinson, anything to add? Because you obviously manage a number of properties throughout the city. Any thoughts on this process?
Yeah, we try lots of things to communicate with tenants, including some of the things that Heather mentioned, like social media and email and stuff like that. But we've really found that the most effective thing to do is to just get out and walk around the complexes and talk to people. That really is what works best. It's also the most time intensive and challenging thing to find time to do.
So thank you. Pastor, traditionally, even in maybe a COVID-19 world, the pulpit is still a great place to get the message out. How do we do that?
Yeah, so I think while the Interreligious Council is less active than it had been in the past, I think there are still a number of networks. In particular, right now, there's a network of churches that work on the Martin Luther King service every year, and that's expanded to some different conversations. I think churches are pretty involved in the dialogues that both the sheriff and the police chief are having on an ongoing basis. And certainly with the development of COVID, there's a lot more church activity online. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I don't know that it's been tapped in this regard. I think that may be evident by the lack of participation here right now, but I think there is a lot of opportunity, and I do think that the word can get out there, and I think that certain churches are going to have a certain level of engagement with this process, but I think there's a vast amount of opportunity to push it forward.
Hey,
Guy, if I could I add to,
yes,
add to that? Something that Stephanie said, and I think that's been an overarching goal of ours. We just haven't been able to accomplish it because of our manpower struggles over the last several years is getting out of the car and meeting people where they're at. I think that goes a long way to this whole community initiative. And like Bill said, having the officers know the community that they serve and vice versa. But our officers, unfortunately, are pinned to their cars answering calls for service, and we really don't have that luxury of time. It's unfortunate, but I think that's really right now, that's the missing key to taking us to that next level of community policing or community oriented policing and re-engaging our community with foot patrols. And when I first started in the early mid 90s for me, but I know Chief Janata, they had federal grants for specific officers for community policing specific designations where we had Officer Middleton and Officer Squires at Malone Village or assigned to walking downtown beats or Orchard Street beats. And we miss that. I think there was, that had a lot of value and it served a great purpose. Hopefully we will get back there with getting our manpower standards back to where they need to be, but I really believe that that's the missing link right now.
So Chief, on that particular question, just is it a manpower or a money issue? So I asked it because I know Gary Janata, when he was chief, had federal grants there, and there was an office downtown, I think, in the downtown block in the Genesee Mall. I know right now, I think Officer Gilfus works out with Home Site on some projects. You obviously have your SROs. I know Mr. Sladen and the SROs are out there. But both for the chief and the sheriff, what are we doing on the community policing front? And is it the piece of the money? Is it the piece that you are having a real challenge on recruitment? I know Mr. Cornelius mentioned you're a very young department. You're getting younger as people retire.
Mm-hmm. We're going to plateau here. I'm hopeful.
Okay.
That's an issue. We're close to that plateau but that's something that we're going to have to think about in the future. Well, not me specifically, but so we don't go through this again, is all of a sudden you come on to that large group that were hired all at one time that reached that 20-year plateau. And because I think of some social issues going on right now, a lot of people are questioning if this is a long-term, am I going to stay beyond my 20 years or is it worth it? So I think we've seen a mass exodus of individuals. Maybe it's because when I was named, everybody started leaving. I don't know. That could be it. No, but in all seriousness, no. I mean, the money issue, I know with Chief Janata, they did have the grants that allowed them to bring on additional manpower above their normal. But I believe, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but when that ran out, the program stayed intact for a little while. So, Guy, if we can get to our 67 budgeted officers, that would give us the flexibility of actually having officers assigned in specific areas. When we get a little relief in the summertime with our SROs, they come back and boost our patrol manpower. Officer Carnicelli specifically is designated COP. So that's one officer trying to do, and it needs to be more of a police department mentality than just one officer. But our officers cannot get out of the cars to interact if they don't have the time, because there's the call screen is just, it's full. So we're barely filling our shifts, if not with overtime every week. So it's definitely a manpower issue right now.
Okay, so it's not whether there's another federal grant that comes out with the new Biden.
That's all nice, but it's, that's, to me, that it's part of that culture change and what our goal as a police department is really becoming community oriented, everybody, not just the designated officers, but we also need that time and flexibility.
So Sheriff Schenk, the same question, and also where you're out there with SROs or what we have in the rural areas outside the city of Auburn with school resource officers as well in community policing.
So as far as school resource officers, we do still have a full-time position with BOCES that we haven't been able to fill this year due to some issues out of our control. But we we are going to assign somebody back there again soon. I hope to have somebody there the first part of next year. And it also looks like we will be able to soon offer a part-time special patrol officer they'll serve as a student resource officer at the Port Byron School District. So we should have BOCES and Port Byron covered from our agency. But this has been a challenging year for community outreach for us obviously with COVID. We can't attend the events that we would normally attend, parades, and do a lot of the community outreach type things that we've done in the past. But if you follow both of our agencies' social media pages, you'll see that even though we have challenges with staffing, that we are out there still in the community doing things. For our agency, we're recognizing kids as junior deputies when we can. We're getting out there and trying to build that trust with people in our community. I noticed over the weekend, the Auburn Police Department had the random acts of kindness. Their officers were out there doing some great work out there. And if you follow our pages, you'll see we're continuing to do that. And it's all about building trust. It all comes back to trust. If we're out walking in the community and getting out of the car, people are starting to see us as real people, not just identifying us by the uniform, but they're seeing us as real people. So that to me is extremely important. And I've really missed the ability this past year to be out at the parades and have our people engaged in a lot of the things that we do throughout the course of the year to stay connected with our community and continue to build that trust. And unfortunately, we haven't really been able to have the meetings with our partner agencies in the community that we've had in previous years, and hopefully we can get back to that next year. But staffing is always a challenge. We certainly have a really big area to cover outside the city countywide, but we still do the best we can, even in the current conditions that we're faced with the pandemic, to try to meet people in person and continue to build that trust and provide that outreach.
Pastor, can I go back to you just for a second? I want to let you off the hook. This interfaith group, if you're willing, I'm sure both the manager and the chair of the legislature would love to have a contact list if you're comfortable sharing it with them, and then they can determine who they distributed. It seems like a very secret list that people would try to get, and I just wanted to see if you're paying attention. Yeah. But just if we could distribute that information, because I do think that is a hard, throughout the whole county, a hard group to contact, and is very valuable. So I didn't want to not go back to that particular process.
Yeah, I'm certainly glad to work with them and get as much information as we can out to them, but also obviously to the faith leaders as well.
So thank you. So want to also, we got about 10 more minutes to do this, but I wanted to bring up another question following up on something Mr. Berry either intentionally or unintentionally brought up. So in listening to some of the panels, there have been questions about who's there and who's not there. So I will ask the tough question: who do we still need to bring on? And I would say in the sense of human services, I don't think Lloyd Hoskins is here, but he's so well connected he participated in, I think, the third group. Are we missing somebody that the governor just didn't mandate to be here?
Well, we talked, Guy, on in our third group. I think that when you look at law enforcement reform, you have to look at it as more of a wider lens of justice and the justice system. And I think that there are components that maybe would be helpful to have involved that haven't been: the district attorney's office, maybe probation, parole, those agencies that we can engage to have these discussions with us. Every piece of the criminal justice system has its critical role in how things happen, and a lot of things that we may try or we may think are a good idea to change either won't work, or there's some input from these other agencies that would help us make a more informed decision.
Okay, thank you. And I think I picked up on that comment. That's why I was asking as a follow-up to the third group. Other thoughts people would, or, whether it's human services, I'm assuming the court system is exempted from this discussion because there's some separation there between the executive and the legislative on there, but other thoughts that people have, not only on that particular subject, but other points they'd like to bring up from the discussions that we've had.
Guy, as far as training goes, I can speak at our department. A lot of our talk in our subgroup was about training, how much training you do, de-escalation, implicit bias. APD this year, so far, we've done over 16,000 hours of training. So that includes people at the academy and the different trainings they get, the individual officers that go back out. So to me, training's an integral part of everything that we do, and we can never get enough of it. We've had to get creative over the years because we have been so short to do the different trainings. We have a Police One Academy and we assign a monthly training to the officers that they get. Some of them are at least an hour long, but we can get the de-escalation, implicit bias, driving, you name it, we can get that through that website to everybody on a monthly basis.
Okay, thank you. Former Councilor.
Aye.
Oh, let me go to Councilor Carvajal, and then I'll go to Councilor McCormick.
Sure.
You're
on mute, Dia.
There you go.
So I think I'm going to change the subject though. So if Debbie has something to
All
say.
right, let's go with Councilor McCormick and then we'll go back to you. Okay. Sorry about that.
Wait, here we go. Oh, I'm on mute.
We can hear you. Well, you're on mute now. Councilor, you're on mute.
There we go.
Okay.
It's so easy. I just wanted to add, someone mentioned the district attorney, and he wasn't listed on our group, but I don't know if he ever made it to any. I think he didn't make it to any of the meetings. I think that's a critical piece of this whole pie. From the vantage point of that area, could add a lot of information and open up some, avenues for things that we can't do without the DA as far as criminal justice or police work. So if anybody has an in with him, we really could benefit from someone from that office joining this effort. That's my 2 cents for today.
Well, if I could add to that, I did invite before, when all the stakeholders were coming together, I did invite the district attorney, as well as somebody else that I believe that was integral to this, is Ray Vazari for the Office of Mental Health. I think with our involvement every day with his staff, we definitely needed some insight from that office as well. But I can only ask.
Thank you. Former Councilor Carvajal, you have a question?
Yeah, so my concern is kind of interdepartmental. So how do our law enforcement agencies communicate with the other departments, say in the county or the city, in order that there are not mixed messages during, I'm thinking right now, there've been some mixed messages with regard to public health that have come out in this time of crisis, and that concerns me. I think it's a place where we can do better. Specifically, it was with regard to staying home over Thanksgiving. I think our community got mixed messages from public health versus law enforcement. And I think that we need to be on the same page. And especially we're seeing that we're not necessarily always on the same page more recently in this time of crisis. So is there something in this process, in this exercise, that can help us to make sure that our messaging is going out well?
Yeah, I can answer that. So in regards to the gathering limits, when it comes to the public health crisis that we're facing, we do have a group that meets twice a week to discuss the issues that we're facing, a number of elected leaders, our public health director, our law enforcement representatives, emergency management, some other health officials in the community. We do meet twice a month to discuss issues concerning this. In regards to the gathering limit, I'm thinking you're getting to the concern that you have regarding my position about enforcement. Perhaps I could have done a better job with messaging in regards to whether or not our agency was going to enforce gathering limits on the Thanksgiving holiday. However, my concern with that is that our governor was trying to paint the picture that we could provide enforcement action that just wasn't possible. And then a number of people, I believe, were under the false impression that we could do things that we couldn't. So my position on that was to be transparent and explain what we did have the ability to do when it came to gathering limits. Certainly, my position was that people shouldn't gather, and I hope that I was able to articulate that, especially when I responded to some concern over my initial reaction to that. But my concern was that the governor needs to understand that, if he's implying that law enforcement can do something that they can't do, it puts us in a difficult position. And I wanted to send the same message that the governor wants to put out there, that we shouldn't gather, we should limit what we do and how we get together in person right now. But I just think it's important that he doesn't put information out there that implies that we can do something we can't do. So at the time, the media was.
What do we do? What do we do to make it better so that there isn't mixed messaging out there? Because as a manager of your department, I feel that you are in charge of your resources. So you make decisions every day. So if there is a bicycle stolen and you get a call, compared to a major accident on Grant Avenue that you have to go out to, you make those decisions as to where your resources can go. And that's something that's already in your purview. But the issue here is about the mixed messaging that happened. So what are the things that will prevent this as we move forward? So I'm not really concerned with the differences with the governor's issue or whatever. What I'm interested in is how do we move forward so that Health and Human Services and all of the departments communicate together as one unit, because you do have the autonomy, a lot of autonomy as that arm of public safety, but you're also part of a bigger picture for the city or for the county, and where are the mechanisms that are in place that help those communications to happen? Because really what the problem is not necessarily the issue of the mandate, but the issue of communicating interdepartmentally so that there aren't mixed messages. And that's my concern.
Well, I think that I'll certainly continue to partner with our elected officials and our health director here locally, to try to do the best we can to get the right message out there. It's just, I just want to make sure that our elected leaders beyond our borders understand that sometimes there are limitations and don't imply that we can do things that we can't do. But, I'm certainly going to continue to partner with our elected leaders and our health director as we meet twice a week at a minimum to discuss some of these things. And if these things pop up again, learning some lessons that I learned last time, I'll certainly have some additional discussions with them. But if somebody's pushing me, into a corner and implying that I can do things that I can't do, I'm going to be transparent and be honest and say we can't do that. So that's what happened in that particular case. I hope that doesn't happen again. But I'll continue to partner with our local people on these issues.
Can I ask a follow-up question, not the lateral of county to county, but city to county, and then also including the state troopers, because I noticed they're not part of this discussion for whatever reason. How is that? And again, my frame of reference goes back to Chief Donato. Sorry to pick on him over and over again, but my frame of reference goes back to that period of time. How do you communicate between the three coverage areas?
In regards to sheriff, myself, and the state police?
Yeah, just as you're dealing with incidents where 911 might get calls for all three of you at a site.
Sure. Well,
Departments.
at a higher level, we, unfortunately, COVID has put a damper on it, but we historically have monthly, what we call chiefs meetings, Cayuga County chiefs meetings. So the captain, lieutenants, and sergeants, along with my staff and the sheriff's staff, would all meet once a month and discuss issues. That includes the 911 center. Denise Spingler would be included oftentimes with that. And it's just at a higher level, administrator to administrator, to try to, partner and discuss things, work through any issues there might be. I think we have an excellent partnership with all law enforcement in Cayuga County. We're very fortunate with the relationship that we have. Sheriff, you want to add to that?
Sure, and I would agree. We have a very good working relationship. I think the chief and I communicate, if it's not via text, by telephone multiple times a day, every day. But we have that same relationship with our state police partners and our neighboring agencies that go beyond our borders. We work very closely together. I also know that our individual divisions within our agencies, our criminal investigations division, I know the people in charge of those two divisions with the Auburn Police Department, our agency, work closely together and speak often. So we have a very close working relationship, not just at the top, but throughout the entire agency and also beyond our borders with other agencies. So when an incident kicks off, if it's a major incident, the leadership from our agencies, we're already, communicating immediately to try to utilize our partnerships to best handle these types of incidents.
Yeah, it's almost instantaneous, Guy, that if something big is going on in the city, I'm getting a call from either Barry Chase or Lieutenant Stebbins with the state police or the sheriff. Hey, what do you need? What can we do? And vice versa. It's a little harder for us sometimes to go out into the county, but when Deputy Bacon was injured, it was all hands on deck, and we do whatever we can all the time, anytime. So it's great to have the partnership.
Thank you. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and I've been paying attention to the chat list. So I'd like to kind of bring it to conclusion, maybe with a final comment from the manager and the chair. I know from a process point of view, as I understand it, we'll have another public meeting on January 5th, which will be most likely the final public forum. There's on January 12th, there is a final large group meeting to finalize input. And I think I'm assuming information will get to all of you who are on this call and the wider community. And then again, the February 1st date that I think both of them refer to, and that's to prepare the presentations for legislative bodies. Anything, Chair or Manager, that you'd like to add before we close this out?
Sure, Guy. When this first was thrust upon us, this Executive Order 203 was certainly, we were in the throes of COVID, and it was probably the last thing any of us were thinking about putting efforts into. And that did delay our start here. We went through a series of fits and starts, but I really feel like at this point, we are doing real due diligence to this project. I feel like I know other communities, the feeling I've gotten from my conversations with them is sort of checking the boxes, and I'd like to think that we are doing a more intensive dialogue. I'm really interested in growing this dialogue, however, to the wider public. And we learned some things in our specific group that I helped to host. And, that was because the couple of questions we had were representative of folks who are not on this specific call right now. So I'm interested in kind of growing some of this dialogue moving forward, but I want to say I appreciate everyone's time. Sean Butler and the sheriff have done an incredible job. Jeff Diger has done an incredible job in getting this up and running. So I want to thank them. And, I know we kind of came into this, like I said, it's the last thing we needed. But I'm really, really pleased with how this has moved forward. So I want to thank everyone.
Thank you. Manager.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody that's on this. We've got 30 participants taking part here this afternoon, and many of them are folks that have been involved throughout the process, and oftentimes, or for many of them before the process. The police chief and sheriff did a great job getting us through some difficult discussions along the way, and prior to this official more formal process that we entered into. Again, they were ahead of the curve, and that's great. It's great for the community. It's great for each of their organizations to have leadership like that, that's anticipating what's coming down the road next. And I think if we can continue to do that, we'll be in good shape. As you mentioned, our next meeting like this will happen on January 5th, and we still are going to maintain those online surveys for those folks that are unable or not interested in taking part in a forum like this, and they can remain anonymous, and we look forward to their feedback as well. We have, I think, had good, productive conversations. There certainly is room to improve and to engage some more individuals and organizations. And as Mr. Berry mentioned, and I think that's really going to be one of our biggest struggles, is how do we get the word back out to the community about the work that has been done here by the agencies, our elected officials, our law enforcement partners, and some of our community representatives. How do we get that word back out to the community so that they can see what the end result of that has been and appreciate the work that's been put into it? But again, thank you all, all of you that have taken your time and continue to take time to help us move this process forward.
Manager, can I make a quick suggestion for the next community meeting? And if agreeable, we maybe make it later to try to get, I know in the meetings that I heard, that was a topic that everybody thought it was going to be a later meeting. Maybe we can get more participation. Just an idea.
Sure. Yep.
Well, to all of you, thank you for participating. Keep up your good works from now until whenever. In the future, you all do, whether it's public service, private service, not-for-profit, religious, community work. We appreciate your time and your efforts. We hope you have a happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, and New Year. We will see you maybe in between, but most likely on January 5th at a later time. So have a good weekend and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah.
Thank you.